You've invested lots of time and money into your business. Your customers place their trust in you. Don't take them for granted. You want your customers to keep coming back. The St. Lucia Bureau of Standards is there to guide you on training and the certification needed to give you that competitive edge. It is more affordable than you think. Call the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards today at 453-0049. SLBS, making quality and standards our way of life. Every year on October 14th, the global community marks the observance of World Standards Day. The observance is an opportunity to focus attention on the important role that standards play in our lives, as well as a time to appreciate the work of the thousands of experts who develop and promote the use of standards in an effort to create a better world for us all. This year's theme is Shared Vision for a Better World. The St. Lucia Bureau of Standards is proud to make its contribution to this lofty agenda as we fulfill our mandate to promote health and safety, protect the environment, and overall improvement of the quality of life of all St. Lucians. Get involved. Visit our SLBS website, slbs.org, our YouTube channel, or visit us on Facebook for more information on standards. Happy World Standards Day.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us as we celebrate World Standards Day 2021. Let me take this opportunity to recognize our esteemed presenters and speakers, as well as some of our participants joining us. We have our Minister for Commerce, Manufacturing, Business Development, Cooperatives and Consumer Affairs, Honorable Emma Hippolyte, Mr. Verniv Manuel, Director of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, our speaker, Dr. Axel Kravatsky, who is the Vice Chair of the ISO TC 309 on Governance in Organizations, Our very own Ms. Yvonne Agard, the chair of St. Lucia Bureau of Standards Technical Committee on Management Services. Our very own again, Dr. Alison Kajada, who is the chair of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards Subcommittee on Governance in Organizations. We'll be joined also by Dr. Valda Henry, who is the Deputy Governor of the ECCB. We have chairpersons from our technical committees, our members of the technical committees, the members and staff of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, particularly Standards Development Department. A very warm welcome. Good morning. And I know that we have some persons from various business sectors who are joining us, as well as the media. We would like to welcome you to our dialogue on governance in celebration of World Standards 2021. This year, we'll be celebrating World Standards Day under the theme, A Shared Vision for a Better World. I am Zamala Haynes Joseph, and I will be the host for this morning's event. Since 1970, World Standards Day has been celebrated across the world. St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, being established in 1990, has joined the world in celebrating World Standards Day. And this year, it really is important to us that we focus on just one aspect of standardization, which is governance. And we will use this opportunity to highlight and mark some of the work that we have done under this committee. Henry Ford said that if you think of standardization as the best that you do today, but is to be improved tomorrow, you get somewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are getting somewhere as we focus on standardization, getting us towards that better world. I would now like to invite Mr. Vern Emmanuel, who will give us some welcome remarks.
Honorable Emma Hippolyte, Minister for Commerce, Manufacturing, Business Development, Cooperatives and Consumer Affairs, Heads of Department and staff of SLBS, Chair of SLBS TC 18 Management Services, Ms. Yvonne Agard, Vice Chair of ISO TC 309 Governance in Organizations, Dr. Axel Kravatsky, Chair of SLBS TC Subcommittee on Governance, Dr. Alison Kajada, Dr. Valda Henry, Deputy Governor General, ECCB, SLBS Technical Committees, members of the media and invited guests, fellow St. Lucians, good morning. On behalf of the Standards Council and Management and staff of SLBS, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar as part of the celebrations in commemoration of World Standards Day 2021. World Standards Day provides an opportunity to highlight the importance of standardization and the contributions of technical experts who assist in achieving consensus. This year, World Standards Day is being observed under the theme, A Shared Vision for a Better World. It assists in showing the path to sustainability as we seek to implement the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The agreements that govern international standards aim to facilitate the exchange of goods and services through the elimination of technical barriers to trade. These multilateral agreements are designed to address developmental issues, an objective which coincides with the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. As part of our response to the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, SLBS has transitioned our services online, and we are grateful to recognize the support of the British Standards Institute through the Commonwealth Standards Network, who aided us in making this possible. The Commonwealth Standards Network provides a platform for collaboration between national standards bodies and key stakeholders throughout the Commonwealth. Its objective is to develop a standards network and to promote the role of standards as a tool to increase intra-Commonwealth trade and to strengthen the quality infrastructure in all Commonwealth countries. Through the implementation of the Caribbean leg of this project, in St. Lucia, we have been able to deliver activities in 6 areas relevant to our identified needs, that being a national quality policy, legal approximation related to standards and metrology legislation, standardization with the increased adoption of ISO standards linked to our national priorities and the SDGs, certification, standards awareness, and metrology. The CSN provided in-depth technical assistance in standards capacity building for our technical committees and promoting engagement with the international standards development process. We were able to complete 2 fully functional platforms to facilitate stakeholder engagement, and the recently launched SLBS web store has placed the standards and services of SLBS a mere 1 click away on all devices. Through focused attention on standardization, St. Lucia can harness the effectiveness of standards in supporting public policy and the development and operation of a robust national quality infrastructure. Today, we welcome your participation in this webinar on ISO 37000, Standard on Governance in Organizations, Guidance. SLBS participated in the development of this standard, which further highlights the benefits of the standards component of the CSN, ensuring the maximum participation in international standardization. We look forward to your continued engagement, as well as we collaborate with all stakeholders as we do share the vision that standards will assist in attaining the SDGs for St. Lucia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Emmanuel, for your welcome remarks, particularly helping us to see how through the establishment of a web store, we've really improved and increased access to standards. And as we think of standards contributing to sustainable development goals and, of course, giving us that better world, this definitely is a step in the right direction. At this point, I want to invite the Minister, Honorable Emma Hippolyte, who will deliver remarks on the occasion of World Standards Day.
Mr. Vernie Manuel, Director, SLBS, heads of department and staff of SLBS, Chair of SLBS TC Management Services, Ms. Yvonne Agard, Vice Chair, ISO TC 309 in Governance, Dr. Axel Kravatsky, Chair of SLBS TC 18 Subcommittee on Governance, Dr. Alison Kajada, Dr. Valda Henry, Deputy Governor, ECCB, members of SLBC technical committees, members of the media, invited guests, fellow St. Lucians. Good morning. On behalf of our Prime Minister, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, the Cabinet of Ministers of the Government of St. Lucia, and in my personal capacity as Minister for Commerce, Manufacturing, Cooperatives, and Consumer Affairs, I welcome you to this webinar of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards in commemoration of World Standards Day 2021. Again, I'm truly excited to participate, and I take this opportunity to congratulate the Standards Council, the directors, staff of the Bureau, and all technical committees and volunteers, and wish them a happy World Standards Day. A week ago, we launched the SLBS web store, a key component of the Commonwealth Standards Network project. Today, we welcome your participation in this webinar on ISO 37000, Standard on Governance in Organizations. SLBS is proud to have participated in the development of this standard, which further highlights the benefits of the standards component of the CSN. It ensures maximum participation in the development of international standards. An article published in October 2017 with the Chartered Institute of Quality by Philip Parker, CQP FCQI, explains the advantages of adopting a good governance strategy in any organization. And I quote, benefits of good governance that can have a much wider and far-reaching positive effect on business culture, reputation, clarity, and financial sustainability. Good governance reduces the threat of safety, legal performance, and warranty concerns that can severely impact an organization and its stakeholders and all interested parties. These stakeholders and interested parties may be customers, directors, staff, suppliers, shareholders, and even the entire community. In short, good governance benefits all stakeholders and is critical for the development and sustainability of both the public and private sector. Our government is committed to embracing good governance and has articulated this in our 2021 manifesto. The government is determined to restore openness, transparency, honesty, and trust in all operations of government. I therefore look forward to continue working with the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards on the adoption and use of this standard, which will assist in the implementation of the National Quality Policy for St. Lucia. I thank you, and I wish everyone a successful webinar.
Thank you very much, Honorable Emma Hippolyte, for your kind words. And we appreciate also how we would see the linkage of this topic that we chose. It supports the Sustainable Development Goals, and it also supports the national policy when we think of issues of transparency, as you would have raised in your remarks. We are happy to have you with us as the SLBS celebrates World Standards Day. We understand that we have participants joining us, maybe not in the Zoom, but via YouTube, you might be watching, and as well on Facebook. So we just want to say a special hello to those persons who are joining us through the live stream. We are celebrating World Standards Day and really acknowledging the hard work of the technical committee members. We would have heard the Honorable Minister in her remarks touch on that, even our director. World Standards Day is really about the standardizers, the persons on the ground working towards developing consensus, developing agreement to having the requirements made available for use by all. St. Lucia, through our participation in regional and international standards activities, also have our national experts registered and participating at the international level. That means that the voices of St. Lucia, the perspectives, the experiences of St. Lucia are taken on board in a regional and international context. It is my pleasure to introduce the chair of the Technical Committee for Management Services, who is just one of these experts who have volunteered her time and her expertise. And she's going to touch on the journey, how we got here. Why did we decide on governance? Why did we create such a subcommittee and even a technical committee, and how we focus on issues dealing with governance? As we see, this really is the thread. We listen to the minister speak on it, and I mean, every topic that we do is important, of course. So we understand that it took us some time to get here, and she's going to tell us some more about the journey. I would like to invite Ms. Yvonne Akard to give us a background into the Governance Technical Committee. Ms. Akard.
Thank you very much, Zamala. Honorable Emma Hippolyte, Minister in the Ministry of Commerce, Manufacturing, Mr. Vernie Manuel, Director of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, our invited guests. I'd like to thank you very much and want to wish everybody happy Standards Day. Of course, as a chair of the TC, just want to give you a brief insight into the work that we do, the voluntary work, the exciting work, the interesting work that we do in ensuring that standards remain a very important component of our lives. The TC Management Services Committee that the Honorable Minister spoke about, and also the Director, was launched in December 2013, and that's a long time ago. And it was born out of the need to follow and mirror the international work on management consulting services. And as you'd recognize, services now, the services sector is one of those emerging sectors that is being noticed and is being given quite a lot of prominence. And so even at the International Standard Organization, that too is reflected. So of course, 3 years later, in 2017, ISO 20,700 guidelines for management consulting services was adopted by the ISO, and that was followed with national adoption. So in 2017, we adopted the national standard for management services. Okay, and this was basically our first experience as a committee in participating in the grueling work of the International Standard Organization. Of course, over the years, this voluntary committee comprising management consultants, risk managers, quality experts, safety professionals from both the private and the public sector work assiduously in ensuring that St. Lucia's services sector had a portfolio of sector-specific national standards available for use. Because as you would appreciate, that these professionals would be competing in the international arena. And so there had to be some standards, international standards, by which that service was being offered. Most of these national standards represent identical international specification covering management systems for quality, project, risk, security, assets, and road safety, among many. However, prior to 2013, these subject areas were not addressed by the national portfolio of standards. To date, the Management Services Committee has 28 published national standards. And for me as the chair, it's a milestone, and it shows the commitment and work of that committee. On the international front, the TC18 Management Services Committee follows and mirrors the work of ISO Technical Committee along the same subject areas. As a single committee, the SLBS TC18 coordinates the most participation in ISO work, being mapped to the most ISO technical committees, the working groups, and subcommittees. And of course, our colleagues like Betty Comby, Peter Lord, Alison can attest to us attending those meetings at 4 o'clock in the morning, having to work through hours and hours, sleeping with our coffee in our hands. And again, like I said, this speaks to the passion that this committee holds when it comes to standard development. As a group, we do have quite a very, very, very active discussions, because of course we're looking at the best for St. Lucia. As part of its effort to improve St. Lucia's participation in international standardization, the management services in 2019 agreed to expand the portfolio of international mirror committees to include the TC290, Security and Resilience, the TC309, which is the subject of today's Standards Day, Governance of Organization, and Asset Management. So again, I think we maybe think that we didn't do enough work from 2014 until now, and we wanted to add some more energy and some more work into what we do. So of course, as the scope of work increased and growth of the actual ISO TC309, the National Committee agreed that a separate subcommittee would have to be established. And for the reason that we wanted key subject matter experts to contribute at that development level, and basically to strengthen our participation in the international committees. And as you would appreciate, I mean, at that level, you have world experts, subject matter experts. And so our participation in honing in on our local talents and our local capacity was extremely important. And of course, who would take on that challenge? No other than Alison Kajada. She loves a challenge, very hardworking, very, very committed. So she took on the task of leading that subcommittee. And so in March of 2021, we launched that subcommittee. And it was very well attended. We targeted persons from education and research institutions, governing experts, consumer group, government agencies, and all, because we recognize that the issue of governance is pervasive. It cuts across a lot of organizations. And so with that committee, we were able to get some key people. We have on that subcommittee, Mr. Calix John Leo, who is he's not a stranger to us, and he's there in the capacity of general interest. And he was the former director of the Financial Regulatory Authority. On that committee, we also have our constituency groups. We have the National Insurance Corporation, CIP, National Community Foundation, the Ministry of Commerce, represented by Consumer Affairs Department. And I'm sure we understand the importance of those governing bodies to us as St. Lucians, and the importance for them to have standards to guide the operations. Today, the ISO TC 309 has published 4 standards, 2 of which are already national identical adoption based on the work undertaken by us on the TC 18. ISO 37000-2001 standard was just published in September 14, 2021. And at the national level, that subcommittee is currently in the process of conducting the necessary standard development steps to ensure the national adoption. Of course, we note the increasing importance of this governance organization to stakeholders and the general public. And I speak to the CIP, the National Foundation, the constituency councils, and all of these things. Therefore, the need for good governance and the expectation for transparency and accountability is a priority. In applying this standard, stakeholders across both private and public sectors can have increased confidence that governing bodies are making decisions that are responsible, accountable, fair and transparent. And I heard the Honorable Minister speak to the objective of her government, the mandate of her government to ensure accountability and transparency in governance. This guarantees a shared vision for a better St. Lucia. So this will be the 3rd adoption based on the work of the newly established National Committee. Okay, and this demonstrates St. Lucia's commitment to addressing national concerns on anti-bribery, compliance, governance, and whistleblowing management. The work continues as more projects are explored and more national participation is ongoing with the respective working groups to allow our voices and small island development state perspective to be considered from the inception. So it means that when we have those experts on these committees at the international level, our context, our content as small island development states are taken on board. And so when those standards are developed, we ensure that they are applicable, and they can resonate with us, and we'll be able to implement easily. So with these words, I'd like to wish all of us a happy International Standards Day. I want to encourage some of us who are on the live and on the thread to join the Bureau of Standards, to lend your expertise in national development. This is one way of giving back. This is one way of coming in, volunteering your expert to ensure the growth and development of our country. It's important that we play our role in whatever way we can. And standard development is a very, very, very important way of giving back. So I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank the Bureau of Standards for the support, because the voluntary work is just not one way. We as committee members over the years have learned a lot. We've been able to participate. We've given the freedom to participate in those international organizations. We're given the opportunities for training, and we're given the opportunity to promote the development of standards. So let's all join in and to assist the Bureau of Standards in becoming one of our top performing statutory bodies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Agard. I am really impressed with this journey that you've described. It indeed was a journey that the committee would have gone on. And it really was a journey that the committee would have gone on. And it really, you sort of capture how, not just as a committee, but for us as a country, for St. Lucia, how we would have progressed, how we would have grown and really improved in our participation at the international standards level. And this morning, you are, of course, followed by our the vice chair of the ISOTC 309, who we are really fortunate to have join us. And he's sort of like family, because he is the vice chair of this international committee, and he's from CARICOM, or he represents a CARICOM country, Trinidad and Tobago. So it's really nice to see how we as a region are influencing, participating in international standards development. And I know that your kind best wishes on World Standards Day are well received. We have over 80 persons in the Zoom, and of course we're streaming live on a number of platforms, Facebook, YouTube. As well, we carried live by our national television network, NTN. So we are really reaching a number of persons. And if you are not yet involved in standardization, it really is about you. It is about, as our chair of the TC18 would have said, it is about national development. So we continue to encourage you to be involved in national development. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I am happy to introduce Dr. Axel Kravatsky, who is a managing partner of Syntegra ESG, advising and guiding leaders on how to develop, activate, and amplify the power of their brand and people to positively impact society and the natural environment profitably. As indicated, he is the vice chair of the International Organization for Standardization Technical Committee 309, Governance in Organizations. He has definitely led purposeful governance and strategy, as he's been working with boards of directors and committees for over 20 years. His specialties are in financial and state-owned enterprise, utilities, and non-profit sectors. He's the founding chair of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, initiated the development of the Trinidad and Tobago Corporate Governance Code of 2013, and led the development for the first and only accredited corporate governance training program in the Caribbean region. Axel has worked in Europe and USA with senior managers and board members on leadership development through their Swiss partner company, Stuckey Leadership and Team Development, as well as consultant to boards and governments on corporate governance reform. He serves as the co-convener and the technical editor of the working group that had responsibility for developing the standard ISO 37000 2021 Governance of Organizations guidance. The ISO committee currently comprises of 77 countries and 24 liaison organizations, and it is really a fit and an accomplishment that this standard was approved and published after a ballot received by over 160 ISO member countries in September 21. Axel has a PhD from the London School of Economics, and he dealt with innovations in the development of adaptive management strategies in conditions of high uncertainty with multiple stakeholders and conflicting objectives. Ladies and gentlemen, he's a member of the European Corporate Governance Institute and the Romanian Association of Independent Directors. Dr. Kravatsky, we welcome you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you, and congratulations to the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards and all protocols observed. I would like to make a presentation in three main parts. First, give a little bit of context about ISO standards and governance, then focus specifically on TC 309, where St. Lucia has been playing such an active role along with Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago from the Caribbean, and then focus on the ISO standard itself and give some details, and then link it with the theme of the day around the world, ISO standards and sustainable development goals. And so the first part that is very important to be clear on is that ISO standards have two specific features that are important about the organization. The first is that its purpose and its objective is to have clear and unambiguous language and provisions that help international trade and communication. So, for example, within the field of governance, having a clear definition, what is governance? What is oversight? What are the components of oversight? What are the components of accountability? What are the different types of organizations and stakeholders? So having shared language and a common framework. The second aspect, which is very important and which you have highlighted already, is that it is operating by consensus. And that doesn't mean that there needs to be unanimity about everything, but that issues brought up by all constituents through their national member bodies and into the committee are going to be discussed. And the consensus is widened. So that means that the processes are, the standards are developed in an iterative way, which I will illustrate more. And it is very inclusive, meeting the needs of all the different countries and all the different stakeholders. The next important point to consider is that there have been three main phases in ISO standard developments. The first phase was when it was mostly about product specification. In the second phase, it moved into business process standardization. And in the third phase, it's also dealing with business potential, organizational potential. And so 37,000 is within this category of standards. This is a picture of the International Council of ISO. And at present, there are 166 member countries. And there are 801 technical committees, and we're speaking about one of them, 309. And there are about 24,000 standards published today. And ISO is in liaison with about 793 organizations. Since we're also speaking about sustainable development goals, and one sustainable development goal, number 13, deals with climate, it is important to note that ISO in its recent General Assembly in London issued a London Declaration, which commits ISO to actively consider climate science and associated transitions in all its standards and all revisions of standards. So 37,000 is taking full cognizance of this fact already and is consistent and building and supporting that work. ISO is also committed to involving civil society and those most vulnerable to climate change in this work. And so in this way, also, for example, working with small island development states and developing countries across the world and other vulnerable groups is of importance and is actively being promoted. And it's also developing an action plan and measurement framework for tracking this process, because there is a great amount of urgency about what needs to be accomplished in order for the world to be able to maintain and improve the standards of living of so many. So in the next, I would like to briefly speak about ISO standards and their role. So specifically relating to governance. So there are many codes in many different countries. And for example, the one place to look at is the European Corporate Governance Institute has a collection of codes that countries submit into this shared database, and you will find a lot. Now, one of the features about that is that they are being developed by many different types of organizations, and which is different from the ISO approach. And they also play a different role, which I would like to illustrate. So ISO standards are complementing this process and are not competing with other national or sector-specific standards. So it is encouraged and it is complementing, for example, for the central bank to issue corporate governance guidelines for firms that are regulated by the central bank, or for the Ministry of Finance to issue regulations and guidance for state enterprises, for example, or sporting bodies, for a national sporting body to issue guidance on that, or many different fields where people issue guidance because it matters to the success of their organization. ISO standards are complementing that. Because we can think of, there is an order of precedence. So at the highest level, there is the international, for example, European Union level or other international legislation. Then there is a national order. So, and then after that, so that takes precedence over mandatory regulations, for example, central banks, stock exchanges, and many others who issue mandatory regulations for companies and organizations that are within its remit. And then below that, or complementing that, are external voluntary regulations, and ISO standards fall into that category. So they are complementing that work and are also the basis upon which organizations can develop internal policies. Okay, so organizations, the law is the minimum standard. And in addition to do well, there are many other practices that organizations can and should adopt if they would like to derive the benefits associated with that. So therefore, the feature of ISO standards is that the critical feature is that all countries, all sectors, and all types. Okay. So now let's turn briefly to the work of Technical Committee 309, Governance of Organizations. So the primary purpose of good governance is to promote sound decision-making by leaders on behalf and for the benefit of stakeholders to whom they own either a legal or a moral accountability. And the committee is organized in this way. So it has been mentioned, we have 55 P members or participatory members, 23 observing members, and there are 25 organizations in liaison. There are 7 working groups, and St. Lucia is participating in a number of them. I'm going to be reporting primarily on the work of Working Group 1 that was then worked at the technical committee level. The technical committee takes a decision. The working group is providing input for consideration based on feedbacks. Okay, and at present, the working group is continuing. It has published 37,000, but it's currently working on 2 new standards, 3705 about how governing bodies can use indicators, and 37,006, which are specific indicators about effective governance. And other relevant work is also going on, and I will illustrate how it comes together. These are the liaison organizations, so that you can see that complementing the National Mirror Committee work, which I congratulate and is excellent in the case of St. Lucia, which brings in together all the stakeholders at the national level. It is also important to have the involvement of liaison organizations that that work across countries. Okay, and this is the list that is in liaison with TC 309. It has also been mentioned as to what type of standards, that there are standards already published. And I'd like to just briefly mention that two of these, so anti-bribery and compliance management systems, they have requirements, so therefore they are certifiable. And there's whistleblowing, for example, has also been published this year. It follows the same structure. It's a management system standard, but it is not certifiable. And 37,000 is on purpose a guidance standard. And the other standards that are being developed along there currently are also guidance standards. And they're also a specification, as well as a guidebook, for example, on anti-bribery, which was published this year. The process of developing standards is inclusive, and that means that it builds on national consensus into an international consensus. And that means there need to be various iterative, it's developed iteratively. And at first there's work within a working group, then the committee considers it, and it is considered at national level by the national member bodies to consult nationally to see what people are saying and are formally submitting comments on that. Then it is being put out to all member bodies of the ISO system as a draft international standard. Comments from there are then resolved, and a final draft international standard is put out again for comment, editorial comments, and for voting again by all member bodies of ISO, and then it is issued as an international standard. So it took 4 years to develop this standard with 1 year of preparatory work. So it is, and in total there were 112 meetings and over 1,500 comments that were formally in detail resolved and dealt with. So let's turn now briefly to 37,000 itself. Now, what is this? What is notable about it? The first most important thing to know, the headline message is that it is the first international benchmark for good governance. So until now, there has not been an internationally established benchmark agreement to say this is what the world agrees. And the ISO, being the preeminent organization that pulls together 166 member nations on this, is then the strongest indication for that. And it consists of 11 core principles that are the heart of successful organizations. There's one primary principle, which is the purpose of the organization. So governance is there to enable the organization to fulfill its purpose. So that is the primary principle that needs to drive the rest of the organization. So to do that, there are 4 foundational principles, and they are value generation, strategy, oversight, and accountability. And they need to be supported by 6 enabling principles, which along with corporate governance, not corporate, corporate is a subset of organizational. It's for one corporate form, or one form, which is the corporate form. There are some conditions about integrated governance and the governing body itself. So a way to illustrate this in more detail is to look at the structure and logic of the document. So so the definition of governance, let's look at that. So it is a human-based system by which an organization is directed and overseen and held accountable for achieving its defined organizational purpose, right? So there are a number of key words there. So it's a system. It's about organizations. They're being directed. They're overseen. So it's not controlled. We use controls to oversee, but the process is to oversee. And that is also, it includes a corrective action mechanism that is important in oversight and accountability for achieving a defined purpose. So that means the purpose needs to be defined. So the main important clauses here. Clause 3 is about terminology, very important. And then you have governance conditions, which is another way of calling clause 4, which deals with integrated governance and the governing body. Then you have clause 5, which provides an overview and deals with the outcomes, different categories of principles and what that means, and gives guidance for how to appropriately implement it. So how do you tailor a system for this, and gives guidance on reporting. And then there's clause 6 with 11 principles. Each one has a rationale and key aspects of practice. And this is to be implemented in an integrated and concurrent way so that you then realize the described governance outcomes. Okay? So let me illustrate this with one principle, oversight. So we remember that the definition is of governance is a human-based system, direct, oversee, accountable for achieving a defined purpose. So let's look at overseen, okay? And I'm not describing the whole principle in detail, I'm just pointing out one aspect of it, that oversight includes, among other things, ensuring the implementation of an internal control system. Now, an internal control system includes, at minimum, financial controls, compliance, and risk management. Okay. In addition to that, there would be effective and timely reporting, and there is taking of corrective action, which I had mentioned. Now, that is to ensure that this is implemented. You have to ensure it is implemented. And in addition to that, you also need to assure yourself that the reporting that you're getting through that system is actually accurate, that the internal control system is actually effective, and that the governance system as a whole is working. Okay, so you have to ensure you put the system in place, and then you need to assure yourself that it is. And to do this, now you can go to 37001, which is about anti-bribery, which has guidance, for example, about financial controls. You can also use for compliance, you would use the compliance management system, a standard, and part of that includes also whistleblowing system. So therefore you can use 37,000 and compliance So the compliance, within compliance, you also have anti-bribery. So that is one subdimension of compliance, or often. And then you have whistleblowing, which is one aspect that you also need in all governance systems, so that you can have independent, that stakeholders both inside the organization and outside the organization can inform the governing body of aspects that have a private channel to reach that and report. Now, the assurance process itself, it consists of audits, which are both internal audits as well as external audits, or assurance by the governing body itself. And then you have direct reporting, which means that by the control, internal control functions, which means that there would be private sessions between risk management and compliance, in addition to internal audit, which is directed by the governing body. And then you have whistleblowing, and that is, you have another standard to help you with that. Okay, so this is just an illustration for how the work within the technical committee complements each other, and that you are able to put in place a very effective and integrated organizational governance system. Overall, we can say that there might be probably 4 unique benefits of using the ISO system. First, it's enabling. So if you have already regulations that are either in legislation or in issued by the body that regulates your industry, let's suppose the central bank, for example, that this is enabling you to comply with that and to apply those principles. And for organizations that do not have guidance, this is the source of having a benchmark on what good governance constitutes. It also allows you to compare the governance within your organization with that of others. So that is important. For example, if you are in partnerships. So it's very important, as we are tackling sustainable development goals, collaboration is the only way that we will succeed, because we are interdependent in this. So to do that, we need to be able to assure ourselves and to compare that we are acting reasonably and that we can be trusted in working with one another. And it is complementary for those organizations that already use ISO standards, of which there are many standards, many organizations. And it is the fourth benefit is that it is inclusive. It is taking into consideration the views of not only large organizations, but small organizations, developing countries, and many different forms of diversity. So overall, we can think that there probably are maybe among about 4 patterns that will be strengthened and accelerated. There's probably more, but I would like to highlight just a few of them. So one aspect is that there is probably going to be greater consistency in terminology and a clear shared conceptual framework that all different bodies that are responsible for governance in and guiding and regulating governance in organizations are able to share that. Another aspect that is important is that the centrality of purpose for organizations is clear now, and there is consensus. So you would find that these topics are being addressed in many new guidance documents and many discussions around the world. And this provides, the ISO 37000 provides both definition as well as guidance for how to develop it and how to use it as part of an entire governance system in a very integrated kind of manner. What is also going to happen, most likely, is that oversight will become much stronger, and risk governance and accountability will all increase quite dramatically, because we are more interdependent. We need to assure ourselves that everybody is doing their part. And so having clear terminology and having a clear system, as 37,000 and the associated standards now provide, the scope, the rigor, the clarity with which the respective components, responsibilities, and accountabilities can be assessed is therefore increasing a lot. And finally, I think it's important that integrated governance will become much more widespread, and because now we have clear language that brings in legitimately stakeholders who have an important role to play in governance. And in more complex organizations where you have divisions and different other organizations that are part of the same legal entity, you would know now how to construct an integrated governance system, but also the thinking that goes with it in terms of the actual work that governing bodies need to do in integrating complex information from many different domains, financial, social, and environmental, all has to come together. So in my last couple of minutes, just briefly on the SDGs. So if you go to the ISO website, you can see that there is a useful SDG tool that guides you which SDG, which standards apply. Now I'm going to just focus on 16, which you see that has about 159 standards. And these are 4 that are currently, for example, highlighted on the ISO website that if you consider these specific targets within the SDG 16, you can see how the different standards apply to that. So from 37,000 about governance, about whistleblowing, about anti-bribery and compliance management systems, they're absolutely crucial for reducing corruption, creating accountability, inclusiveness, and broaden the participation as has been described. So with that, I thank you very much for the invitation, and I wish everybody a happy Standards Day, and invite everybody to participate in the important work of the standards work in St. Lucia and the Caribbean and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karatsky, for your intervention and really allowing us to get an insight into what is the ISO 37001 standard that speaks specifically to governance in organizations. And as you said, it's a guidance document. And the four main things that you said that really resonated in terms of the benefits of this standard, applying this standard in an organization. It's enabling, it's comparative, it's complementary, and it is inclusive. So if you already have ISO standards in place, it really is just another suite. I always like to think of standards like a tool. And I say, if we think very basic, that a carpenter cannot work with only a hammer, cannot work with only a saw. He needs a whole toolkit to be able to build and to design whatever it is he's doing for you. So standards similarly are tools. And this is just another tool that we're encouraging you to add to your toolkit, another tool that we want you to ensure that you have as part of your business improvement, your business management systems. Thank you very much. I'm so appreciative. I know that we were conflicting with Trinidad and Tobago and their events, and I'm happy that you were here. We were able to sort out our timings and have you here with us this morning. As I said, this is just one of the experts that serve on the ISO committee. And we in St. Lucia do have national experts who would be contributing as well to the ISO committee. And while I say that Dr. Kravatsky is like family because he represents Trinidad and Tobago, we have Dr. Alison Kajada, who is the technical committee, the subcommittee in St. Lucia, the National Mirror Committee on Governance. She leads this committee, and she also participates in the international work of ISO Committee on Governance. Dr. Kajada is, of course, no stranger to us in standardization, having pioneered the promotion of standardization and quality within St. Lucia as a former director of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards and a founder and operator of Sunstad Beverages, Inc. She now owns and operates KMA Consulting Limited, which offers management systems consultancy. She is passionate about organizational performance, and she really believes in engaging people, having flexible structures and systems, and sustainable business success really needs an adequate supportive external facilitating business environment. Dr. Kajada, through her company, KMA Consulting, is affiliated with a globally recognized network of consultants, the Table Group, and they offer and deal with organizational health and performance issues. She currently serves as the national representative on the ISO TC 309, the ISO Technical Committee that deals with risk management, and the one that deals with quality management and quality assurance. She has her academic background in natural science or chemistry, law, quality management, and productivity and project management. Dr. Kajada, thank you very much, and I now invite you to deliver your presentation on governance. Okay, we're not hearing you if you're speaking, and if you would please just switch your displays so we would see the presentation mode. So in the top where it says display,
okay, sorry about this. My apologies. I had been on display.
So we can hear you and we can proceed.
Is that all right?
Just in the middle box that says display settings, just click and swap.
We should have. I'm not sure. I'm sorry about this, Zamala. I am on the display mode in my presentation. You're not seeing it on the display mode? And I also...
No. We're seeing your notes, so you just need to swap the display.
And I did it from PowerPoint, which I normally do for all presentations. I'm seeing it in front of me. You're not seeing it?
We're seeing your presentation.
Axel, you
stop sharing. No, stop sharing and share another screen.
Okay.
And now when you share the screen if you have two screens.
I do have, okay. Are you seeing it now? Are you seeing it now?
No.
There must be an issue, and this is...
So you can just go ahead with this view, because
I am, yes, because I am doing it as I normally do it on all presentations in slide view. But you're saying you're not seeing it in presentation mode. I'm not seeing, I'm seeing it on my screen in presentation mode.
okay, you can continue. We're just seeing your notes slides, but in order not to delay, I think
I really okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
It came on?
Just use this view and use the down
Yes.
arrow now to go through.
Okay, so yes, I'm not sure what's causing this, and then let me apologize to the viewers out there, the close to 100 viewers out there, and I think we did attempt to have a trial run before, but for some reason we didn't. Notwithstanding, Happy World Standards Day to all of you, and to the Bureau of Standards, a big congratulations to the director, the board, and all of the supporting agencies for over the years in assisting with the development of St. Lucia's quality infrastructure. I need to recognize the Minister, Honorable Minister Hippolyte, who is no stranger to the Bureau of Standards, and who is back with the responsibility for standardization and quality. Let me also recognize the director, Mr. Vern Emmanuel, himself too very passionate, particularly about ensuring practical solutions to enforcement, and also to Yvonne, who is as passionate as I am involved in standardization for many years, from the time I was at the Bureau of Standards in 1999, and she continues to serve. So it is, I'd also like to recognize all of my colleagues, my standards diocese, people who have, other persons who have been involved in the standardization movement. Betty Comby, Peter Lord has been mentioned, and many others. So thank you to you. When I was asked to speak at this point, after Yvonne and Axel, who is the expert on governance, I thought, what can I share with you that could be of value? And I was left with no choice but borrowing. In fact, I need to acknowledge my father, Anthony Gajado, who's flying with the angels. His first book that was published several years ago was entitled Thoughts from a Caribbean Novice. And I couldn't think of no other appropriate subtitle to express my thoughts, which hopefully in sharing with you, you all would be not just incentivized to join the voluntary standards development movement, but also you would be, we would create some sort of passion in you to follow the good practice movement, which has been in the making for quite some time in St. Lucia. And so I go on to the next slide. In terms of establishing the context, the subtitle that always begins my discussion on establishing context, so when I give speeches of this, or I speak about to audiences like this in relation to standards, is decolonization. I think once we recognize that colonization has actually has identified our development pathway over the past decades as young nations within the CARICOM region, with a history of independence under a century, we will view standardization and the promotion of quality in a different context. This colonization view is that, what does it mean for us? We're no strangers to being told what to do. Funding may be withheld if we do not comply with something. We have actually gone on a pathway where many, I know, may describe as one that is a system that has not been built on a culture of national and regional robust quality assurance system. And it's okay if you, many persons and many authors have written about this, written about the region in comparison to a child, a human being, using natural sciences, living sciences, to demonstrate our level of development. What COVID has done, however, is forced us to, the Great Reset, as it's called, is to force us in a more catalytic way to look at that, to examine that internal pathway. That internal pathway, which was being examined by standardizers and professionals in the quality field for several years. You would have heard the minister speak of the development of the national quality policy, the director speak of national quality infrastructure. And so this period really has forced us to shift and catalyze this movement of best practice. And us tell ourselves it's not okay to boast that we use international this, international consultants, international this, unless we are using or we are following guidance based on the consensus principle, where we have had an opportunity to participate and sit at the table. And so this is how, this is the context in which I thought I should capture the experience that I've had over the years. Because certainly, traversing, the first time I was exposed to governance was actually attending a corporate governance seminar hosted by a very renowned economic mind in the field. And this is Dr. Avinash Prasad, whom I had the pleasure working with over a decade and a half later to assist St. Lucia in its attempts to develop a national vision and pathway of some years ago. And so that was in about more than 2 decades ago, yes, being exposed to corporate governance. And further out to that, getting, yes, the training with some training programs, being promoted in the region, certifying directors to serve on boards and a number of things. So there's no shortage of that. Governance is not new to us. But why are we here? Why are we here when, the only way I could describe the gap is that, and that analogy with the colonization mindset is that traditionally we've been primarily a checklist society that you tick the box. It's akin to what a friend of mine, or rather a professional in quality, the Deming Institute, always refers to as compliance excellence. Compliance excellence versus contextual excellence. And that contextual excellence that I speak of is related to where we want to all get to as a nation. Be bold enough to establish our targets. Express clarity in where we want to get to, even if we don't know how we're getting there. But chart the way forward and change the plans on the way when we get there. In terms of expressing, this first slide looks at a very bleak view of where we're at. And I have no figures. It's listed, you search the internet, you get all the indicators. I mean, I think it's rather useless not presenting data because you can access it on the internet. And so go check it out. Corruption levels are increasing. Our our rankings by international Transparency International are decreasing. Productivity is one of the major cries that we've experienced. Falls in, you hear the policymakers talk about it. Management, constant cries of very weak, meek management systems. Divisiveness, and the divisiveness that I speak of, divisiveness related on the regional level. Because people who know me know that I don't stay on bleak very long. In fact, I'm sometimes accused of naivety because I focus on the good side. And this is how I could express what, it's not rocket science. Literature is littered. We have highly trained nationals. St. Lucia alone boasts of our two Nobel laureates. The region boasts of many. Very innovative. Creativity, in fact, so creative, so innovative that I think our policymakers and regulators, this explains the challenge that we've had with compliance, where we just simply think following rules are very restrictive, and perhaps it's because we never participated in the designing of these rules. And we highly connected people. In spite of the divisiveness that has characterized the region's policymakers in coming to a united front in dealing with many of the challenges of the region. In my experience working throughout the region, working on regional projects, you mentioned one name in another member state. The majority of the people say, oh yes, I know him, and they would be boasting in terms of how connected they are, went to school together, etc. So we highly connected people. And yet still, we suffer from this, the divisiveness. Why the gap? And then if in terms of just reminding you, this is the sort of, this is the gap we're speaking about. That aversion that we have to declaring our targets, manifesting it, saying where we want to get to. And by declaring it, Axel spoke about the clarity. Clarity means documenting it in some form or fashion so that it can be communicated, so that we know that everybody is on the same page. And you will be surprised how much time is spent, those of us who've been involved in the standards development process, how representatives throughout the world, how much time we spent just clarifying the meaning of one word. And accountability is the key one that I'm always reminded of, because that was the highlight for me in the standards development process, where we were reminded by the Spanish that accountability is not translatable into one word. We need to take care to ensure that the wording in the document speaks to responsibility to and responsibility for. And these are sort of the discussions that you spend time ensuring that you get it right. And the international standards development process allows for that. And so these are just all I have to say on my thoughts on the gap. I want to move to the other slide, which is courtesy of Tricia from Trinidad, because I think that it's not by accident that we have our mindset is somewhat averse to reflecting clarity in where we want to go, where we want to be, because maybe we fear the accountability aspects and all of that. It's not by accident. It's because I think if one had to describe our inherent disadvantage as a region in terms of the dearth in human capacity, it is looking at the SME sector. They typify not what's only in the private sector, but also in public sector organizations, where one person does everything. The standard speaks to the need of differentiating, shifting the hats. There's a role for every, there is a different role for even that same person when you're under-resourced. And a highlight with regards to the standard would be the assurance, the independent assurance. Axel, you may remember that, where there was the discussion on whether or not we should have reports written, codified in the standard. And the developing country, particularly the region, stood up against that. Said, no, we don't want this to be misunderstood and taken off a tangent where consultants just BRAM or the regulators, financial institutions, then demand written reports and this and that, just like they did with strategic planning. That the highly regulated sectors, our financial sector, require strategic plans, documents, and this. And so what has it forced? Our management consultants have just turned into people who plan for people, who present a document, you pay them a fee, and bam, it goes away. And that's the value of the developing world and the region being in this process. And a lot of discussions back and forth until the terminology independent assurance was used, where could it be implied, well, whatever it takes. Now, documented, I just want to note, does not mean it has its real value. And when we say documented, we mean just not to confuse it with written. In any form or fashion that could be reproduced the same. With technology, documented could mean a video, a voice recording, or whatever. But that's the only way we're sure that when we're not there, when we're not in the office, or when we're busy wearing our other hats, looking on the outside, only then we can really be sure that the people we leave behind, we charge with the responsibility to supervise, that we give the accountability aspect too. And that's another thing when we were discussing, Axel, this whole issue of accountability, I'm reminded of where the common exchange of views, particularly from persons within our region, where who shared their experiences. It's not unusual to delegate and hold people accountable without delegating the correct powers and authority. So people are accountable suddenly to achieving particular performance indicators, but they are not given the resources. They're not given the delegation of authority is not transferred in an adequate manner, where they can exercise it, but then they are held accountable. And all of these things came out behind the scenes in the development of the standard. I left this slide up from Tricia because I know, having been there, all of us, through the small business, through the micro enterprise, we can identify, it almost provides, it epitomizes what goes on. And let's make no mistake, within the public sector. Because on the other side of the fence, and if I could probably draw an example from the pandemic, with the present situation that we're facing, and what our recent discussions within the Chamber of Commerce in terms of the support given to small businesses to respond to the challenges, the ravages of this pandemic. And you try to go to for support within the public sector, and the very departments that we are looking on for support, like the Labor Department, has not been prepared to support the private sector in executing measures that could be in the greatest good for the economic development of this country. And all organizations, therefore, this standard is applicable to all organizations, because the philosophy of SME is both within public sector and private sector, where the expectation is one person does everything. The standard will give guidance to clarify these roles. I probably have been speaking a lot to the next slide, because Axel spoke quite a bit about what the consensus definition of governance is. But it's no surprise that if we're operating in an environment where our people are stretched, stressed, under-resourced, one person does everything, with all good intentions established by our policymakers, with all good intentions. I have worked with several politicians from varying sides of the fence. And when I say varying sides, there are really just two sides to a fence, different administrations. And I have never come across a politician that says, let's destroy this country. That's my stated goal. We all want good. They all want good for this country. But the how and the guidance, there is assistance to provide the how. The applicability of the international standards and any standards, as Axel so nicely demonstrated, is across all types of organizations, all sizes, whether you are corporate, established and regulated under the Companies Act, or you are an NGO, any group. The definition of an organization by the ISO community is considered any group of people coming together for a common purpose. And you see why it's important to clarify that purpose, express it with clarity, because we have many groups of people who don't even know, who are not even aware of what that purpose is, whether they're on the same page. And I must say, Axel has done a lot of work in that area in terms of assisting companies define their purpose and relating it to operation, profits, success, those indicators. Since I have the liberty of switching back and forth to slides in that view, I want to just say a note here, as I mentioned at the work on purpose. With that current regional perception, I deliberately left out the dollar sign. What we always so quick to blame. We know the macroeconomic indicators that are placed on us, and so we judge as low, high debt to GDP ratio, no financing, etc. Again, search the internet. But we most times, very often, spend the time speaking about the result and not the cause. And the dollar sign concerns that this region has, I must say, is a result, is an outcome, not dealing with the internal issues. And so this is why deliberately, when I spoke about establishing the context of the region, I left out that issue of low revenues, blah, 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 and the story will go on and on. Possible solutions? Well, here you go. And ISO 37000 lands this straight on the table, the desk of our leaders of organizations, of those charged with the responsibility or who are accountable for the organization's performance. If you're a corporate institution, we're speaking to the companies, the boards of directors. If you're a public institution, in some statutory bodies you have councils that also have the governance body is also representing stakeholder interests, and that presents another challenge for the use of the standard. It would assist councils in running effective statutory organizations, public agencies. And a colleague of mine, and I must mention Betty because she's so passionate about systems thinking and quality, but working at the operational level. And she tells me, Alison, I speak to the workers. I want to get to their hearts and minds. And when I speak to the workers, they're frustrated. They sit at her training and they say, I wish my boss attended. Because you see training for quality management or particular management, and naturally our governing body members, our directors, whether executive positions or not, don't have the time to attend these things. And so they're not exposed to the value of systems thinking, that you can't solve problems in with a one-dimensional approach. And Zamala mentioned it very well with using the analogy of the toolkit. It's multifaceted. I mean, in science, you know that from a lot of the natural science persons and engineering field, you train on that. You know you can't go one way to solve a problem. You outline the steps of the reaction and you take into consideration all the byproducts, all the connecting points. It's a system. So we're bringing that language of system thinking through the standard 37,000 to the minds of our busy owner stakeholders, our busy stakeholder representatives who are sitting on boards and voluntary, etc., but charged with the responsibility of governing these public institutions or private institutions. I said a lot about purpose-driven, and AXA said about it, because when you have the core principle as the purpose, and you realize, you remove it, everything else crashes, everything else fails. How are you so sure that you're measuring, you have the right KPIs, key performance indicators? How do you link other performance indicators, measurements at the process level, to what the board really wants? So board members, council members, owners of small businesses, I encourage you, and I think the international community that has put in a lot of work and financed this work, this support, to provide you with the guidance, I encourage you to start from that point. Take time off from your busy schedule, whether it's 2 of you or 3 of you, whoever owner stakeholders, define your purpose. Executive teams, and I speak of executive teams within government, define your purpose. Assurance and improvement goes without saying, because I've roped it together because you can't improve what you do not know. And your insurance mechanisms will give you a true picture, that independent assurance mechanism of where you're at. And so Axel spoke of corrective action, the standard, it's underlaid with a philosophy of continual improvement, corrective action. Again, I will repeat all of what is there is guidance out there. These are some of the standards, but particularly Yvonne spoke to since 2013 that a committee was established to mirror a lot of the work of ISO in the area of management. And it was established with quite a bit of insight, because this is where our country, our region needs assistance in managing and governing. With these parting words, I wish you again happy World Standards Day. I must say I'm thrilled to be on the side of the fence that is involved in the nitty-gritty work. Roll up your sleeves, get up early in the morning. In the past, I was on the other side of the ISO fence, which really didn't give me the privilege to be among experts, great leaders in the field and subject matters of this. So on that note, I will stop sharing, and I would like to apologize again for what was there was a result of no testing before, and that's fine. It happens to all of us. Have a great World Standards Day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kajada, for your insightful words and focusing on SMEs, which is us. We are SMEs. And the chat is alive, and I'm happy for that. And I hope we get enough time to answer your questions. We have one last presenter, and that is Dr. Valda Henry, who is the Deputy Governor of the ECCB. She's a native of Dominica.
I think, Samara, we missed everything. So you may want to start again.
There we go. Thank you very much. I'm happy, and thank you for your insightful words and your kind intervention as we focus on SMEs and how they can see the importance and impact of standardization. We, of course, have our next presenter, who is Dr. Valda Henry, and we sort of pressed for time. I was just saying that the chat is alive. We note that we have quite a few comments coming in, and we hope we have enough time to be able to get to all of your comments and queries. Dr. Henry is a native of Dominica, and again, we are all one family. We are a Caribbean people. She is an expert on governance, and she currently actually recently took up the post as the Deputy Governor of the ECCB. And in the 90s, she also worked at the ECCB. She has a PhD in finance from the University of Warwick, and her focus really is on governance and social security in the Caribbean. She has advised a number of governments and international organizations, including the International Labour Organization, ILO, on governance-related matters. She is focused on providing a lot of community assistance through her programs and initiatives like the Phenomenal Caribbean Women's Symposium and the Phenomenal Caribbean Men's Symposium, including a lot of work she does with her youth series. She's aimed at empowering men and women and the Dominican youth, respectively. Dr. Valda is joining us via a video message, and I will now pass over to her to deliver her presentation.
I start with the epigraphs. One, for any company that hasn't done well, one of the solutions is the board, cited by S. Miller, and one of my own. There is no good governance without men and women of integrity. Truly, we'll find that governance is really more about the people than about the structure. There's always been a debate, especially in our Caribbean, about government-appointed institutions and how government-appointed institutions are not partial, are not objective, and are not well governed. That truly make the difference. The men and women who sit on these boards are the ones who determine whether this institution will be a well-governed institution or not. And the relevant sustainable development goals that governance, in my view, relates to and refers to are SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, and SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And by the end of this presentation, we will see how these three goals are so tied in with good governance, and how good governance is important for the attainment of these goals. So governance, what is this? Well, it's the systems by which companies are directed and controlled. It is about what a board does and how it sets the values of the company. And what you see in both definitions, the focus on the board. It goes back to what I said earlier. It's truly the board who determines the governance framework in an organization. It's the board who determines the culture of an organization. And when we speak about values, what are we speaking about? And all institutions have core values, and I'm sure SLBS has its core values. These values translate to the culture of the organization. And the culture of the organization is determined to a large extent by the governance of the organization. And that has been placed in the charge of the board of directors. ISO 47000:2021 defines governance as a human-based system by which an organization is directed, overseen, and held accountable for achieving its defined purpose. Some keywords in this definition. Human-based system. But more than that, the word directed, overseen, and held accountable. Governance is about accountability. And you know, sometimes in organizations, and maybe not even just organizations in life, the higher we are in an organization, we feel we are entitled to privileges and can get away with breaking the rules. Governance says no. In fact, governance says the higher you are in the institution, the greater your responsibility and the role you must play in upholding the rules of the organization, the culture of the organization, and the values of the organization. So why this focus on good governance that has led now to an international standard? So many financial scandals in the past. We've also had the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2004. We've had greater scrutiny by shareholders and stakeholders. We had media scrutiny, but also too, we had organizations wanting to do the right things, boards of directors like you wanting to do the right thing. And that has been one of the impetuses of this good governance movement, because it is really understood that without good governance, organizations cannot be sustainable. They can't be efficient and effective. Good governance lays the foundation for that, which then leads to sustainability. You see how we tie back to SDG 11, sustainable cities and sustainable communities. And so what are some of the elements of good governance? Which I talked about that already. They follow, the rule of law, transparency, accountability. And you notice that word is coming back, Why? Because at the end of the day, we have to be held to account. I always say that if there is no good governance, there cannot be success. But more than that, if people are not held to accountability, there cannot be performance. It's because we know we are going to be scrutinized, persons are going to determine whether we've done a good job or not a good job. But you know, accountability has to start with self. We shouldn't wait because we think someone is going to cast oversight on us for us to perform. We should all hold ourselves to account. You know, the Bible talks about to whom much is given, much is expected. And what that says, as you are board members, much is given to you. And you need to hold yourself to account to do the right things. And you know, one of the key questions we ask in good governance, or key things we say in good governance is, when faced with a decision of doing anything, ask yourself, would you be okay if that action, that decision was put to light, that everyone knew about it? But also too, would you be okay if your parents knew that that's what you've done? That serves as a good guide to keep us on the right track. Governance code, which stemmed way back, was asked to do an investigation. In 1992 it was, yes, when Robert Maxwell went missing. And then all to explain that you 5 main sections of that code that looks at the role of the board and board leadership and the company's purpose. And you'll see a greater emphasis talking about the entrepreneurial role of the board, the greater oversight of the board, the linking of purpose and strategy to risk. That wasn't in the earlier codes, with the tying of strategy to risk. In the recent codes from 2016, we see that happening. Then the division of responsibilities, the different roles of the different players, from the board of directors, the chairman, the other directors, the MD, the staff, stakeholders and shareholders. Then we talk about compensation. We know that's a big thing. Audit risk and internal control, again critical. Why? Because risk you cannot talk about strategy. I always say, take a coin, 2 sides, a head and a tail. If we don't have the head, that coin is not legal tender. And if the tail is missing, it's not legal tender. It's the same thing with strategy and risk. Organizations ought not to talk strategy if they're not thinking about risk. But oftentimes, when organizations meet to do their strategic plans, they talk about the wonderful things that they want growth by 30% and 40% and 50%. Income, net income to grow by 70% and 25 and 30. Without asking the parallel question. What are the risks involved in attaining those goals? And consequently, because these questions are not asked, you sometimes find management taking decisions that they believe will lead to those goals, even if they are so risky. But why? Who then must be held responsible? Go back to Mila, the board of directors. Because by setting a goal so maybe ambitious and so out of your own risk limits, what you are saying to the persons entrusted with getting those goals achieved, you must do all that is necessary to get it done. Good governance says no. Can't be by all means necessary. It has to follow ethical rules, it has to follow rule of law, and it has to be in line with the strategic direction of the organization. And we come now to ISO 47000:2021. It's now the single globally accepted reference for all organizations on governance. So while yes, the UK governance code is deemed to be like a good example, and a lot of people use it as a benchmark, you don't necessarily have to adhere to it. ISO 47000:2021 as a code accepted globally, because ISO is a globally accepted organization charged with making standards which its members must comply with. It then takes on that role. And so ISO has many segments. Again, and when we look at this segment, it talks about the governance and the organization. And there the focus is on strategy and risk. And I was so happy to see that focus on risk, because I said, yes, that code is truly in tune. Because as I've explained quite lucidly a little bit earlier, risk is one of the key responsibilities of a board, and with strategy, they go hand in hand. It speaks about the principles and the outcomes. And there it talks a lot about the principles, about accountability, about compliance, about responsibility, delegation, ethical behavior, governance policy, because that is something I've been advocating for years with my clients. You need to have a board governance policy to govern the operations of your board. That is akin to the code of conduct and the employee handbook for employees. But what is the board's code of conduct? And if you spin around our region, there are so many boards that have no code of conduct. They meet and they operate, and sometimes when they want to hold members to account, they can't, because they have nothing written explicitly or even implicitly in terms of what the conduct are. So again, it focuses on that. And then it speaks about the roles, the different roles of the various stakeholders, from the shareholders to the staff to the wider community. And that's when we see, again, goes back to sustainable cities and communities. And then the governance of the organization. And we talk about, again, the role of the shareholders and the stakeholders and the managers. And all of those persons who are to work towards the furtherance of the strategies and the goals of the organization. And that's when we speak too about decent work. Because ultimately we have to ensure that we provide an environment, and especially now in our COVID-19 era, organizations are mandated to ensure they provide a safe environment for their employees, as well as their clients, their customers, and their stakeholders. Because we know what the risks are if we don't do that. And now COVID-19 has made it even clearer, the importance of good relations with our staff, the importance of high staff morale. Because why? A lot of organizations are working remotely. And how do you maintain that synergy, that energy, and that morale of your staff who are all over the place? Critical. But I always say one of the key things that COVID-19 showed for us is the importance of human resources. We often talk about human resources, and it had become almost like a cliche, that the human resource is the most important resource of the organization. But when we looked at the strategies, when we looked at the policies, they did not align with that statement. COVID-19 showed us that we truly must get that aligned. Why? Because when we moved to all of these places, especially in the early, last year, in the early time period of COVID, when we were not sure what it would be and how it would be and what the impact would be, as organizations move remotely, what did we see? The structures remained empty, while the human resource were the ones who ensured the work continued with IT support, of course. And it brings me to one of my little pet peeves, that organizations and boards of directors, they have no difficulty approving 10 million, 30 million, 40 million for a structure, a new building, a headquarters that would be a landmark in their countries. But ask them to spend $100,000 on staff development, on staff morale, on HR resources, capacity building. They flounder and they falter. In many cases, the answer is a no. COVID-19 says we need to revisit this. We need to spend more time so that truly we can get to do SDG 8, decent work. And so, critical. And then, of course, we come to the overview. And in that overview, the principles outlined earlier are dealt with in great detail. And what is ISO 37000-2021 saying to us, saying to organizations? It is saying that if you want to have a sustainable organization, if you want your organizations to continue in perpetuity, you have to begin to pay attention to your governance structures. which starts at your board level. So it starts with you, the board. You are the ones who will determine. And one of the things I always say, I often ask, and I when I go about, doing my training, or when I went about doing my training to managers and boards of directors, one of the key questions I ask is, what legacy do you want to leave? And so the board of directors of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, I ask you that same question. The governance committee that is up to the good work that you've done. And I saw from a link that Ms. Joseph sent to me, that you've read this, you've made your comments on this, you have been working on this governance. What legacy do you want to leave? What is your legacy for good? Decision-making structures. That's part of it. Pay grade. That annoys my little. Is so connected to that shared vision. Everybody working to that shared vision. No one speaks about, recognizes what role I play in achieving the strategies and the goals of the organization. And each person holds his or herself to account. So that when the organization, for all of the many structures that we have in place to hold persons to account, the work is easy. And that's what good governance aims for. That we've developed an institution where you don't need like a taskmaster, but persons, because of ownership of the goals of the organization, ownership of the governance structures and framework, they need no policing. They are self-policed, self-regulated. And the studies continue to show that that yields some of the best results, if not the best results. So what are some of the benefits? And I think I've spoken about that, of the benefits. A climate of trust, transparency, and accountability. I'm not going to read all because you have it right before you. Its benefit is that it ensures that everybody knows the role they play, and not only the role they play, but their contribution to the overall goals of the organization. It talks about providing the resources and the capacities to ensure that the organization's strategies are achieved. And that then brings us to SDG 16 in terms of the good institutions, institutional strengthening. And if we focus on institutions rather than people, what you will recognize in terms of, at the end of the day, what do we think? We have to ask ourselves the question, what is the best interest of the organization? And if we take decisions that in the best we find happening, ultimately the best interest of the people we serve. And that's one of the elements of good of directors too. You have a fiduciary responsibility, which says, and that's one of the benefits of good governance, organization on whose board you sit. All best interest, not your best interest, not that of your friends, not that of the MD staff who comes to you with the stories here. Interest of the organization. We work in the sole best interest of the organization. We'll find that we the benefits of good governance. Before I end, I just want to share with you the global trends in corporate governance 2021. Some of them, of course, they're not all inclusive. So climate change, risk. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. The convergence of sustainable reporting standards. human capital management and development, I would add to that. We see a return of activism and increased capital, markets. And then we saw the virtual board and shareholder meetings. So that last one, COVID has changed everything. Virtual, in fact, this very conference is happening virtual. In addition to virtual, my presentation pre-recorded to then be shown to you now. All of that. And people talk about going back to pre-COVID era, pre-pandemic era. Let me just alert you. There is no going back to pre-COVID era. There's only going forward. There's only taking what are the lessons. And as a board of directors, and as we speak about governance, and that is what ISO 37000-2021 is calling upon you to do. To take a proactive, innovative stance in managing the realities of your organization. In recognizing that the past is gone and will not be returned. And it will not be returned either. But to say, what are the lessons? Some we can carry from the past. But what are the lessons of today or tomorrow? In fact, it demands that, we talk about black swan risk management. Black swans are very unlikely to happen, but if they do happen, catastrophic impact. COVID-19 was one such black swan. Although you could say in hindsight, if persons paid attention, we could have maybe seen it coming, maybe not the when. And that is what this era forces us to do. To begin to but I always say, take off the box, no longer thinking outside the box or within. No box. But open mind to begin to see what the future will hold. But more importantly, what strategies we must to ensure that we are able to thrive in the now and more importantly, and so folks, I've got to the end. Passionate as you would have seen about governance. Governance is just so critical for sustaining institutions, sustainable organizations, and more than that, for bringing out the best in us, for giving our people opportunities to shine. And speaks to that, to identifying talent within our institutions and allowing that talent to thrive. I thank you for the opportunity to share with you today. And I hope you have a great rest of the webinar. And as you celebrate the rest of today, send Bureau of Standards of the participants. God bless and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord uncover his face to you and grant you peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Valda Henry, for your presentation and your remarks. Truly inspiring, giving us the perspective of a potential user. When Dr. Henry started out her work on governance, it was not that so well known. And when we look at the years and the work that has been put in, we are now at a point where we have an international standard. We now have more experts and we can now have a dialogue, have a discussion on the value of governance, the value that it gives, the benefit, not just for the organization, but for the people. And as we see the focus on the SDGs, the focus on how we contribute to that shared vision of a better world, giving and standards really playing a part in ensuring that we have sustainability in the future. This really ties it in nicely. So we, of course, know that we are out of time because we were supposed to end at 12, and we do have just a few questions. So and say that with proposals, review and participate. Dr. pertaining to the ISO 37000, and I will just give is a limitation and
Alison is a bigger expert on that than I am, but I could say that the national quality infrastructure, which probably speaks to those who are setting the standards, those who are involved in measurement, and those who are involved in certification. So all of those are organizations, and all organizations need to be held to account. And for example, there is also an assurance factor, an organization that established the assurance of those certifying and those that assures the competence of those certifying and those who are measuring. So all of these are organizations, all of them need to be governed well. And in order for the government to do its part, the ministries responsible and involved in this process can use 37,000 to guide their own governance of that process, and in the organizations use 37,000 to ensure that you govern well. So it is applying it within the organizations, I would say.
Yeah, and I would certainly endorse what Axel has expressed here, because a quality infrastructure which is guided by a quality policy. Now you have quality policies on different levels, and national quality policy, and you will have, and it's recommended, that would feed into individual industry policies. I saw a comment in the chat earlier, particularly about the health sector, for instance, would be guided, and particularly at this time, by a quality policy for that sector. Embedded in there would be the health quality infrastructure, and that speaks to all the processes and institutions in relation to ensuring that the recipient of the service or good meets the standards and expectations of that recipient. And what do we mean by that? It means that it does not include only standardization, but it starts off with there from a number of areas, because standards provide the benchmark, which if for certification bodies use, etc., you use it for improvement, you begin with standards. Then you have the conformity assessment leg of the quality infrastructure. That in itself is broken down to a number of elements. You have, for instance, certification, assessment, auditing. For instance, you audit against management standards, the audit accreditation. So market surveillance to some extent, but outside of that, but it is inspection, testing under that conformity assessment. Metrology, and I don't want to say the lost pillar, but if anything, I said we started off with standards, but without measurements, you couldn't have standards. And that speaks to the regulatory aspect of metrology, the legal metrology, and industrial metrology, looking at calibration. And of course, in our region, we speak heavily about developing the quality culture and COQ, culture of quality, whatever you want to call it. If you log on to the CrossQ's website, you will get access to the regional quality policy, which speaks so succinctly and with clarity on where the regional heads have agreed to this. See the region in terms of developing a mature quality infrastructure. I want to say quickly that the term was coined through the work of the UN, and that developed nations, the very older ones, didn't need it. They have their different independent structures. But that standardized term to help developing countries grow the hidden infrastructures to support consistency of quality output for sustainability. And Axel, at the institutional level, indeed, the governance standard would be perfect.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jada and Dr. If we may, maybe just one last set of questions, because the chat has really come alive. And I find this one interesting because it's asking about what legacy we are leaving behind for good governance. I find this if we can maybe just shed some light on that, because it's Ira Isaacs was asking, and she went on to say that we all have a contribution and it should be for the betterment of both people and organizations, because without the people who both serve and are served, what are organizations? So what legacy are we leaving behind for good governance, if you may?
So from my perspective, the outcome of good governance are effective performance. And so the organization is able to fulfill its purpose. And the purpose of the organization is always to serve some chosen and identified stakeholders. So it is solving meaningful problems for, okay? So it's finding solutions for solving problems. Effective performance then means you are able to serve and find effective solutions that are causing benefits and well-being and not harm. So that's number one. The second element is about effective stewardship. So this is about the resources. We are using resources in a sustainable way. We are not cutting off our legs in producing one element. And future are able to meet their own needs. In addition, we are meeting our needs and they are able to meet their needs. So that's the second element and the second legacy that good governance leads. And the third one has to do with behavior. And so in the ethical behavior, yes, you are able to live to the values that the organization is expounding. It is also living to the expectation of the community in which you're operating, in the communities in which you're operating, including what are international norms of good and right behavior. So being able to be ethical, responsible, and effective, I think those are the three main elements from good governance.
Thank you very much, Dr. Krabatsky, for that insight. We will end our Q&A session. I noticed quite a few buzzwords came in through the chat, not necessarily a question, but some comments and speaking to accountability, transparency, the rule of law, understanding and practicing good governance principles, and even that many leaders and managers maybe not seeing anything is with perceived bias. So these are all, of course, very insightful for us as we end our session this morning. Delegation with accountability, relevant authority, and resources. This is really hitting the nail on the head for governance. We are very happy that you would have joined us, Dr. Krabatsky. Let me send my thanks to our panelists, our speakers and presenters this morning, our Honorable Emma Hippolyte, Minister within the Ministry of Commerce. I think we There we go. I think we just had a slight technical problem. Thanks to our Honorable Minister who joined us and stayed. And I am sure you would have seen in the chat, she also expressed her gratitude and appreciation for a job well done. Thank you very much, Honorable Emma Hippolyte. The Director of the Central Bureau of Standards, as well, Mr. Vernie Manuel, for allowing and creating the space by which we could have this dialogue and focus on governance as just one of the many important issues that we have to discuss as a Central Bureau of Standards. We as I said, I know we had some challenges and we were able to overcome it. And I'm happy that you took the time, you joined us, you stayed, and you were even able to session. Volunteering, your time, your expertise. Of course, standards level. We receive some impactful and words. She is the deputy governor for the ECCB. However, she really has pioneered and infiltrated our region when it comes to discussions on governance, providing consultancies and training on governance through her private organization and consultancy. I noticed that we had quite some positive remarks in the chat for her. I'm really touching on what it would mean for a user, somebody who is already practicing governance, training on governance, speaking on governance, and recognizing that now there's an international standard, what it means for those types of users. I want to extend a special thank you to the management team of the SLBS and the staff of the SLBS. I want to acknowledge the contributions of our communications team, Mistress Vinette Fontenelle and Mr. Marciano Busby. Marciano Busby is a star, and he too deserves a star. Thank you very much for your contribution to me making this event a reality. The team from Standards Development, I appreciate this. I have a powerful team, let me tell you. This is a team of ladies who are definitely bringing gender equality into standardization, and we appreciate and thank you for your contributions. The media who is here with us this morning, I have to say a special thank you to GIS NTN for broadcasting us live on the national television network, especially Mr. Ross Daniel, who stayed with us until late last night, trying to ensure that everything will work smoothly. And I mean, technology is technology and Murphy's Law is Murphy's Law. And I think we were still able to pull it off. So thank you very much for your assistance. And the other members of the media who are joining us, our technical committee members, our experts who have taken the time to be part of this celebration of World Standards Day. We hope that you enjoyed the event. We hope technical committees get an opportunity to join. And I was reminded that we also have some students from the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College who would have joined us. So I hope you learned a lot and you can apply it in your studies as you progress. I'm going to end how I started. When I said, the quote by Henry Ford is that if you think of standardization as the best that you know today, but is to be improved tomorrow, you get somewhere. I hope we've taken you somewhere as we share the vision for a better world through governance, which focuses on at least 3 of the SDGs. We are definitely getting somewhere. Improve, improve, improve. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, especially to those who joined us via the stream and the national television network. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.